was Cecina with Something Beautiful. You're on 94.9. It is 14 minutes past 4 and it's time for Creation Ministries International. Of course, if you'd like to ask a question, we'd love you to send it through. Just text us on 0401 949 949. And today, the marvellous Mark James from New Zealand will be answering on behalf of Creation Ministries International. Good afternoon, Mark.
Good evening, Mick. How are you?
Yeah, well, it's evening for you, isn't it?
It is, yes. It's gone 6 o'clock here. It's dark outside. Yes, it's evening.
Wow. See, it's just a little ditch, and to think how much difference there is that side of the ditch to this side.
Yeah, you guys are always just a little bit behind us.
Oh, Mark. Look, we love speaking to you guys from Creation Ministries. And, of course, you have an awesome resource behind you, creation.com, that website that has some very interesting articles, well, thousands of them. But I've got to say also, Mark, you guys have some really interesting pictures. There's an article there that says humans and chimpanzees are not 99% identical. And there's a picture of a chimpanzee cooking with like yellow gear on. And I thought, that's the most amazing picture. I wonder if it was done by, AI, or if you guys have your own chimpanzees that are turning into humans.
No, we don't have our own chimpanzees. I'm sort of looking at it and thinking it probably was an AI-generated picture, but I can't tell you for certain. But he does look gorgeous, doesn't he?
He does.
And we are fascinated by chimpanzees and monkeys in general. I mean, they look so similar to us. You know, they've got the two arms, they've got the two legs. They seem to have this very similar body plan to us. And,
look, that might be your family, Mark. They don't look like my family.
Oh, dear me. Okay, so you've got one back. That's fine. But one of the things that and it's interesting because I heard this, I read it very recently in an article I was reading. I think it was on the BBC website. And this figure is thrown at us on a fairly regular basis that humans and chimpanzees are 99% the same in our DNA.
Mm.
And this is used as a club to bludgeon us creationists with. Basically, the theory is, look, we're so similar to chimpanzees, therefore an evolutionary step from an ape-like creature to a human being doesn't take much. You know, it's just 1% of the DNA.
Well, I've heard it many times on telly.
Oh, yes. And it's to be honest, when you know a little bit about genetics, it is an absolute lie. And I would suggest that the people who are spreading it, I don't think they're actually themselves liars, but they've heard this figure and it fits with their evolutionary narrative, and they just like to throw it out there. And unfortunately, the general public read the article, they read the 99%, and they just assume that it is a scientific fact because it's generally in an article talking about science. But there's been some recent research that has just blown this 1% out of the water completely.
Yeah. How far?
How far?
Yep.
It is now down to about 85%.
Oh, wow.
And probably even less than that. Now, the interesting thing is how they came up with this 1%. And it was originally a figure that was, when they were researching the genomes of chimpanzees and human beings, back in the day before the Human Genome Project, they were looking at the DNA, and they found that only a small percentage of the DNA it codes for proteins. Yep. And they decided that that small part of the DNA is the only active part of the DNA, and it's around about 2 or 3% of the DNA codes for proteins. And they then looked at the similarity between that 2 or 3% and the chimpanzee protein coding regions, and they found that they were actually very similar. Mm-hmm. And in fact, that 98-99% figure came from examining that very small part of the DNA. The rest of the DNA, they said, okay, 2%, 3% of the DNA is coding. It's the functional part of the DNA. All the rest of the DNA just must be junk. It must be rubbish. And the theory goes that because it's random mutations that are the power, I suppose, behind evolution. It's random mutations are what's causing the evolution to happen. But if you have random mutations, then you're going to get a lot of mutations that don't do anything. They just break things because that's what random changes do. They just break things.
Yes.
So the evolutionary theory just assumed that we would find a lot of broken DNA. They called it junk DNA in our genomes. And so when they found that there's just 2% or 3% of the DNA was coding for proteins, that meant 97% must be the junk.
Wow.
And so they just, and in fact, this whole idea held back genetic research significantly, because if it's junk, what's the point in examining what it does? Because apparently it does nothing. So they went in with this presupposition that this junk DNA didn't do anything, and therefore it didn't need to be scientifically examined. And they focused on the protein coding regions, and they assumed that, okay, because the protein coding regions for humans and chimpanzees are very similar, therefore the DNA and the similarity is 98, 99%, therefore the chimpanzee and human DNA is 99% similar.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, what they are now starting to find is that what they were calling junk DNA, virtually all of it is transcribed. It is used. And this becomes a major, major problem for the theory of evolution, because evolutionists predicted that we would find junk DNA. And what we're now finding is that it's not junk at all. It pretty much, virtually 100% of our genome is transcribed, and if it's transcribed, that means it's being used.
Wow.
And when you take into account all of the genome, then you get to a figure of 85% similarity between humans and chimps at the very most.
Mm-hmm. And considering DNA has so much information in it, that remaining percentage is a huge, huge, huge. It's still telephone books full of information different.
And it is. The human genome has about 3 billion base pairs. The easiest way to think of base pairs is to think of them as chemical letters. So human DNA has 3 billion of these chemical letters. And they were saying that 98, 99% of that, 97, 98% of that was just junk. And therefore the 3%, what was 3%? That works out to be about 100 million. About 100 million base pairs were active, and the rest was all junk. And it has now been turned through the Human Genome Project, which is basically decoded the whole of the genome. We now know that virtually all the genome is used, and that's what you would expect if it had been created by an all-powerful, all-knowing creator God.
Yes. Well, what is it, telomere?
What is a telomere? Telomeres are the now you probably you've thrown at a question here that is maybe going to test me just a little bit. Telomeres are the end portions of the chromosomes. So the DNA in our genome is separated in human beings into, I think it's 23 chromosome pairs. 23 chromosomes, 48 chromosomes, 23 pairs. And so we have these strings of nucleotides or genetic chemical letters, basically. And at the end of each chromosome, at the end of each string, are what are called telomeres, and these are multiple repeating coded regions. And the theory is that these actually protect the chromosomes, particularly when they're being reproduced, during replication, they protect the chromosomes. And I believe that that these telomeres shorten the more that they're replicated, the more that they shorten. They actually become shorter and shorter. So there is all sorts of work going on at the moment trying to protect our telomeres so that the damage in our DNA is not so it isn't so great. Yeah. And the hope is that this will mean that we'll be able to live longer.
And you talk about there being billions of these little pairs of what are they? They're
nucleotides. They're they're called nucleotides.
Nucleotides.
Four of
Do
them.
They have to be in a particular order?
Okay. From a purely from a chemical perspective, these nucleotides can attach together in any particular order. There are 4 nucleotides: adenosine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine. That's the 4. And they can attach together in any order at all. So from a random adding together from random mutations, you would just expect them to be in any sort of random order. Yep. But if they're going to be used to carry information, then obviously you then have to start having specific orders of these nucleotides, and that's where we get things like the coding for protein. But then you also have the coding which controls the quantities of proteins that are manufactured in a certain cell, and that control things like which proteins are manufactured, or which functions happen in which in each type of cell within the body. So this is what the rest of the genome does. Yes, we've got 2 or 3%, which is protein coding. The rest of the genome is the control system for basically running a human body or running an organism's body.
Yeah. Now it's still a tiny bit confusing to me. I've seen some images you guys have on the creation.com website of stuff that's going on inside cells, and they go like pictures of these little dudes walking along with like rucksacks on their back, and then they go and pour stuff out onto these little tiny machines, and this is all happening inside our cells. Is the DNA controlling all of those things?
Absolutely. The DNA, and the interesting thing is that the coding for manufacturing these machines is coded in our DNA. The coding for building these machines is coded in our DNA. To build a lot of these machines, there has to be scaffolding in place to make sure that all the parts of the machinery are installed in the right position, and the scaffolding is coded in the DNA. Genetics, it's just astonishing. The more we look at genetics, the more incredible things we start to find, and the more, as a creationist, the more I see that this points to an amazing God.
Oh, absolutely. Particularly when you see those little, I mean, they must use like electron microscopes or something to get to even, work out what these guys are doing. And then when you see them actually walking along and dropping something off, and then the next guy comes along and drops it off, and you just think, these things are doing this inside every single cell in my body. And then when you talk about the genetics and the pairing and all these like codes, and you realize that every single cell that has like different ones of all these little tiny things that I've seen, they all have to be doing the right job. And to think if just one of them does the wrong job, it's the end of that cell. It's like, it's not going to work. It just all falls apart, and it makes it really hard to believe, okay, you can have a random mistake to make something work even better. We're going down to the cellular level where this whole coding has been sort of, it just works. And to just think of, we're not just talking about, I don't know, we're talking about, it would have to be so many perfect mistakes. It really is impossible.
Yes, yeah, you're preaching to the converted here, Mac. And you know what? I come from a background where I believed in evolution.
Yep.
I never really, and this is I think this is the issue for an awful lot of people out there. They say that they believe in evolution, but they don't really understand it. They've never looked into it. They've never looked at the incredible information that is encoded in the DNA. And I like to actually relate it back to what we know is information that's been coded. So, for instance, a software program.
Yep.
And in one of my talks, I used to show people the Pac-Man software. Just show them Pac-Man, and everybody knew Pac-Man. That was great. Everyone knew Pac-Man. And then I went through this little scenario where, okay, so they were making copies of Pac-Man, and every now and then there'd be a little mistake in the code as they were copying it, and these mistakes, usually they caused problems, so that version of Pac-Man didn't work anymore. But occasionally the little mistakes made Pac-Man better. And so over time, these little mistakes were being selected because it was a better version of the software, and these positive mistakes were building up, and in the end, you get a car racing game from Pac-Man, and everybody laughs. Everybody laughs. That's ridiculous. How can you possibly do that? But that is what evolutionists have to believe has happened, but on a much more complicated scale than just Pac-Man turning into a car racing game.
Absolutely. And, look, we're going to have to go into a little break right now. We'll come back to you very, very shortly, Mark. You are on 94.9. This is our segment with Creation Ministries International. Good afternoon. It was Mandisa, Toby Mack and Kirk Franklin with Bleed the Same. You're on 94.9. It is 23 minutes to 5, and we have Mark James on the line from Creation Ministries International. If you have any questions for Mark, please text them through 0401 949 949. Now, Mark, you guys do have a pretty awesome resource, creation.com. You've written a few stories on there yourself.
Yes, and you know what? This is the premium resource that we have. Our website is just quite remarkable. It now has more than 15,000 fully searchable articles on the creation evolution debate, basically. The biblical accounts, the whole website is just quite amazing. And what I would say to people out there is, if you ever have a question, if you have a question yourself, or you're ever asked a question that you can't answer, then just go to the website, type that question into the search engine, and you'll have a whole heap of articles will come up. You can read them through, you can pass them on to the person that asked the question, and it's just incredibly faith building for people who already have a faith. But it's also challenging for people who don't have a faith, because people, they have these questions in their mind, and they use these questions as an excuse not to accept the gospel message. And if you can provide an answer to the question that they've got, then that's one more stumbling block, I suppose, taken out of the way. And it increases the opportunities to share the gospel message with people.
Mark, I find it remarkable that so many stories here are, people have been reading the Bible for a long, long time now, hundreds, thousands of years. And, some of the information in the Bible, people sort of say, how would they have possibly known that back then, where they're talking about the stars or whatever it might be, stuff that they sort of possibly couldn't have known unless it was divine intervention. And then science has sort of come along at a certain point and gone, no, we've got a whole new idea on that. No, listen to us. Then, for instance, this story you were just talking to us about that is on creation.com, about the chimpanzees. We heard science said, you come on, look, these chimps are only 1% difference. Their DNA is 1% difference to us. And now all of a sudden science has proven that wrong. Why don't we see them coming back again saying, sorry, we made a big mistake?
It's because it's not a battle between science and religion. This is a spiritual battle. People who don't want to believe in a creator, who don't want to believe in God, they have to have some other way of explaining everything around us. And evolution really is the only game in town. So people will believe in the impossible to avoid believing that there may well be a God that that they're accountable to. And I think we tend to, people say, it's about science and religion. No, it's not. It's two different interpretations of the same scientific facts. And invariably, it's the biblical interpretation of the scientific facts that ends up being the best explanation for what we see.
Yeah, wow. And I mean,
sorry? You carry on.
No, I was just going to say we've been talking about like genetics quite a bit today, and
Yep.
so often we see that actually points to the biblical account.
Definitely, that is the case. I mean, evolutionists, they tell us that life started out as a single-celled organism, and over the course of many millions, billions of years, has evolved to produce human beings. A single-celled organism has DNA containing around about 1 million of these chemical letters, the nucleotides. So around about a million chemical letters. Human DNA has 3,000 million chemical letters. So these random mutations that are supposed to be the driving force of evolution have to explain the addition of some 2,999 million chemical letters. And these chemical letters have to be coding for things like bone cells. I mean, single-celled organisms don't have bones, right? So these random mutations have to have coded for bone cells, heart cells, liver cells, blood cells, all in the right place, and just as importantly, not in the wrong place. Now, do random mutations happen? Absolutely. We know that random mutations happen. Do they add information to DNA? No, they don't. By a wide margin, we know that random mutations actually destroy information. In fact, I'll stick my neck out here just a little bit. I would suggest that there has not been one random mutation that has been found that adds the complex coded information for new characteristics to be added to an existing organism. Not one. But still, evolution is taught as a fact in our schools. It really is quite astonishing. But if you actually look at what's happening with DNA, it supports the biblical account of creation and the fall. Because what we know is from one generation to the next, there are mutations between probably around about 100 mutations between one generation and the next, which means that your parents, Mick, have fewer mutations in their DNA than you have in your DNA.
Oh, I wouldn't agree if my dad told me that.
Well, believe me, it's the case. And you know what? Compared to your parents, I'm afraid to say, Mick, you are a mutant. And when I say mutant, think Quasimodo, not X-Men. Okay, you are not becoming some superhuman. It is going downhill.
Yes.
And your grandparents' DNA has fewer mutations than your parents' DNA. And each time you're removing these random mutations, the information in the DNA is increasing. So as you go back into history, the DNA carries fewer mutations and it has more coherent information in it, because random mutations destroy information over time. So you go backwards and you see that you're removing mutations, which is increasing the information in DNA. Go back the right number of generations, and there is the distinct chance of arriving at a point where the DNA carries no mutations. Now, I have to ask, how would you describe DNA with no mutations?
Yeah.
The Bible actually nails this. God created, at the end of the creation week, God saw all that he had made, and it was
good.
Very good.
Mm.
In other words, everything was created perfect. Everything, including DNA, was created perfect. The Bible also tells us that since the fall, the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to this present time. And in fact, in the verse before this, we're told that creation...
Every time a child is born, there's more mutations.
Yes.
Wow.
And we're told that in the verse before this, in the Bible, it says that creation will be liberated from its bondage to decay, which means since the fall, everything, including DNA, has been decaying, which is exactly what scientists see happening. An honest interpretation of what scientists know about DNA actually confirms the biblical account of a perfect creation ruined by the fall.
Wow.
Real science supports the biblical account.
Yes. Yes. Oh, it's incredible, isn't it? And I mean, we see, back in the day one, humans lived for nearly 1,000 years, and as we got less and less perfect, we've got shorter and shorter lives. There hasn't been some branch off somewhere where their lives have got longer because of random mutations.
No, now evolutionists will dispute that a little bit because they say, 400, 500 years ago, the longevity of human beings was less than it is today. So we're evolving to live longer. But that's mealy mouth. The reason that we live longer today is because we have better food. We have better food. Sorry, we you know what? We probably ruined food in a lot of cases, but we are better at nutrition. We have better medicines. So these things are keeping us alive longer. Sanitation. Even though our DNA is decaying, it's called genetic entropy. From generation to generation, DNA is becoming more garbled. Now it's just a little bit each generation, just 100 mutations, which in a genome of 3 billion letters, 100 letters different, 100 letters broken effectively, doesn't make a big difference from one generation to the next.
Yeah.
But these changes, they accumulate over time. And it's almost like rust in a car. One little spot of rust in your car doesn't destroy the car. But over time, those little spots of rust, they accumulate.
Yeah.
And eventually, you get a car that looks a bit more like mine. As these little patches of rust accumulate. And that's what's happening with DNA. That's what we know is happening. This is what scientists know is happening in DNA. And it really does point back to a perfect creation, created by a God who really did know what he was doing. I mean, it is astonishing, the complexity of life.
Absolutely.
And this was created by our Creator God. And since the fall, everything has been starting to decay away. And there is a message here also. There is a point in the future where DNA is going to get to a point where it can't support life. Even within the human population, over time, these mutations are accumulating, and eventually we're going to get to a point sometime in the future where DNA, the genome, it just cannot support life. And at that point, humans will go extinct. Now, we know that Jesus is coming back before that happens. So we don't have to be worrying about these things. But we see an awful lot of animals that go extinct in this world. And I would suggest that, yes, we human beings have changed the environment. Yes, we've made it harder for some organisms to survive. But there is an underlying process that's happening here with DNA accumulating mutations, and with natural selection selecting for various environments for organisms to live in. But over time, this accumulation of mutations is leading to extinction around the world. And we're seeing that. We're seeing extinction all around us.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, it's come to that time again where we've got to say goodbye. Thank you, Mark James from Creation Ministries International in New Zealand.
You are very welcome. And don't forget, everybody, creation.com. If you've got questions, go to creation.com and you will find answers.
You're on 94.9. It is 11 minutes to 5. Good afternoon.